right, everyone. I've had a little bit of life going on this past week, but I did want to talk about the tournament pack that has been released. I think this is really good, and I have to, say a big thank you to the OPR team for putting this together. I think this is a great step forward for OPR at sort of acknowledging that their game that they want their game to be played competitively, that it's a great game to be played competitively. I know that not everyone is into tournaments, but I think it's really great that OPR has really been opening up and sort of really giving a lot more support to tournament play. And with that, they did this tournament pack, and we're going to look at this today, and I'm going to give my opinions on it. So let's go. Let's just start and sort of walk through this tournament pack here. So the first thing here is now the first page or two is a lot of what I call sort of the minutia of tournaments, but it's actually really good. There's a lot of stuff in here that tournament. This is sort of a print. One of the things I like about this tournament pack, if this isn't general guidelines, this is sort of a print and play for tournament organizers to do, and there's a lot of really great suggestions in here. So the first thing they talk about is the different tournament types. One is a casual, where it's a little more fun and friendly, and then there's competitive. I actually think that's really good to sort of separate the two. Tournaments don't always have to be so cutthroat. There can be just casual tournaments. So I do like that acknowledgement that, tournaments don't all have to just be this, cutthroat. But they do leave some room for it for tournaments. So I do like that. Them specifying casual tournaments and competitive tournaments. That's really good. By the way, you can go. I'll put a link into here. You can download these. I'm not going to walk through this word by word. I'm just going to sort of cover some general guidelines here. So for participants, they do require a head judge, and that's really good to have one person's in charge. Then have some secondary judges. Great to have. They have the players and they have spectators. I do like in here they specifically mentioned that spectators should not interfere or help players in matches. So that's good to have. Yeah, great. A lot of this is just stuff that if you're a new tournament organizer, these are just some really good things to just print it out and show to your players so that everything is clear, right? Tournament setup, they have went with a 4-round matches for 90 minutes, 15 to 30 minutes in between. Yeah, I think that's fine. This is a good start. I could sit here and critique everything, but I think this is going for 90 minutes and about 2,000 points. Now, people already know I'm not a fan of 2,000 points, but, if you want to go higher, I've been seeing more and more people go for 3,000 points or 2,500 in tournaments. So, you just tweak that. That may mean that your rounds go towards the 90-minute range. Yeah, that's fine. But like I said, this is fine. So one of the things that's very interesting they did is they did a lot of optional. You're going to see this throughout the tournament pack. It's a lot of optional rules. And I really like that. I really like that OPR is sort of taking this approach. They're not taking the top-down approach to sort of tell everyone what everything they should do. Instead, they're giving you the basics, and then they're sort of giving tournament organizers what I would call sort of optional recommendations, right? It's like, here's a way you can play, here's a way you can play. So the first thing they do, which I really love, is they do provide an optional rule for unofficial armies. So I think that's really great. I think it's great that OPR is sort of acknowledging that they do have this custom army builder. There are a lot of people who are working on custom armies. And the only thing they talk about is that, organizers, they need to choose your unofficial factions and sort of pick which are allowed. So, and I think that's a great recommendation. You don't want anyone just bringing custom armies out of the blue. The tournament organizers need to have a list of the official, custom armies or unofficial factions and sort of provide those to the players. Hey, these are what the allowed custom armies are. So I think that's great. It's great that they have this in here. Another seasonal scenario here is, again, I think this is really great. May choose to provide scenarios which feature optional rules that organizers, may choose to ignore. So that's a really great thing that it is getting into scenarios that, the organizers can provide. They do mention some seasonal rules. So I actually like this, that they may choose to use the recommendations below from the advanced rules. So they do mention that, so I like this, right? That they do say you can play a tournament, but you know what? If your players all have the advanced rules, which to be honest, it's a $5 payment. Like I don't see this as a big barrier to entry. Like I think it's perfectly fine that one page rules say, hey, if all of the players have paid $5 to get, advanced rules, then you can use them. They do give you some one or advanced actions, battlefield effects, fog of war command points. I think all of these are good. I know for internally and in my group, we've been testing out advanced actions and they've been going well. I may test command points. So, but I think that's great, right? They want to give you some recommendations and also talk about how these are seasonal rules, meaning these aren't permanent to play. One thing I will say about 3.4, 3.4 was a huge update. And with 3.4 sort of there was a lot of optional rules that came in, right? And a lot of the optional rules that were already there, like advanced actions, were sort of balanced, as well as command points, I feel they did a lot to balance them as well. That being said, I think that um, regarding these rules and balancing the game, I don't know what all of the extra rules that were added in 3.4. I don't know if all of them are balanced or not. That is where playtesting is going to come in. And I would suggest if you're playing a tournament, try some of these optional rules from the advanced rules, advanced actions, command points, battlefield effects, because we don't know what is balanced and what isn't balanced. And I myself don't have a hard answer on that because I still am playing and learning myself. I know for myself, I have been enjoying advanced actions. I have been enjoying just the assault rule. I've been enjoying some command points. I myself don't have a strong opinion about what advanced rules should go into a tournament because I'm still sort of playing those rules myself and learning. So I think it's great they mentioned this. Hey, here's some options that you can try and let us know. So here, I'm not going to run into all this. They talk about player pairings. That's fine. Basically, that the top players of their games always get matched with the top players after the random initial setup. They mention things like removing players in certain situations. They mention a table setup, which is fine. A lot of this stuff is just really good, covering their bases. Organizer materials, they do talk about, finding a venue. The organizer should do so. Yeah, that's all fine. Player materials, they do specifically mention that players should basically bring everything they need for their army tokens, dice, and a ruler. They mention 2,000 points at this list, and that's fine. They do mention that players should have 2 physical copies. All this is sort of the minutia that just sort of level setting everyone, giving players exactly what should and shouldn't happen. They mention lost and damaged items. I think this is good to mention that players need to be responsible for their army and their items. Right? It's not. I think that's a good thing to mention. Conduct guidelines, yeah, just basically acting mature and respectful, and you can run into that as well. They do mention that an organizer head may remove players for unsporting conduct. I think that's fine and without discussion. So I think it's great, actually, that the tournament organizer and head judge are sort of given a certain level of control. We don't want any bickering or any of that stuff to go on, not in a tournament. All right, preparing for a match. So let's sort of look at that. They talk about materials, terrain effects. I think this is a really good checklist for any game, which is to show your army lists, identify minis and upgrades. So this is just stuff that players, you don't want to have any confusion. So players before the game should basically show and basically verify that your opponent knows what they're playing against and knows what models go to which. Another great thing to do is they mention discuss the terrain. Before you start playing your game, look at the terrain, and my view is the 2 players should always have a brief discussion to say what the terrain does. Is this difficult terrain? Is this blocking terrain? Can we walk inside these buildings? Are the buildings, can you walk on top of them? That sort of thing. All that sort of stuff just needs to be worked out beforehand. Objectives and deployment. This is pretty straightforward. Once the steps are complete, the start of the match. They do give chess clocks as an optional thing to do, and they just cover chess clocks, which we use chess clocks in tournaments. It's fine. They do give you some guidelines for games, things like margin of error, that you can't be perfect, but to try not to abuse it. That's great. Missed opportunities, that if you as a player miss to do something, while you can ask your opponent to sort of go back, maybe you didn't shoot a unit, and you forgot about it. Well, if your opponent says no, don't get angry about it. In other words, it's the player's responsibility to know their army and play it to the best of their ability. And if you miss an opportunity, again, those opportunities are gone without the opponent's consent. Now, I'm sort of a player who I like to just sort of, if a player makes a mistakes in a tournament, I'll let them go. But some players don't feel that way. They feel that's, and I think that players, ultimately it comes down to the player. If you miss an opportunity, if you forget to do something, it's not on your opponent to do that after the fact. So just be prepared for that, right? You should be playing. You should, and don't get. I always say, don't get angry if your opponent, if it's your mistake, and if your opponent doesn't feel comfortable letting you do that over again. Hey, that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. All right, hidden information. Things like writing hidden information on a sheet of paper. That's great. Let's just be fair. Outside materials. They do mention something here, which is a little odd, but I don't mind it, which is like players can't take notes or use mobile phones or calculators during a match. Yeah, I think this may be more about that. The OPR doesn't want people getting distracted. They don't want people on their phones or taking notes. They feel that both players should just be listening to each other, should be, paying attention to what your opponent. And that is very true. Believe me, in a tournament, you as a player are responsible for listening to what your opponent says. And if you're distracted, and if you're on your phone and your opponent says something, and then you say, "Oh, I didn't hear that," that's on you. So I don't mind this, that basically saying, hey, don't get calculators or your mobile phones. Just, focus on the game. That's your responsibility as a player. All right. Game ending and scoring. So it comes down to, this is a very simple point system. It's just 3 points for the winner, 1 point for a tiebreaker. Interestingly enough, I've never seen this happen, which is that at the last round, whoever has the most victory points ties, everyone wins. So then apparently in an OPR tournament, you could have multiple first places. I think that's fine. It's a little more casual for me. I myself am a big proponent of sort of the 20-0 system that's been adopted on other games. I think this system is fine. It is a little simplistic, but the tournament organizer can change their victory conditions to whatever they want. I think these are fine, and I don't mind that basically it seems like in this particular case there is apparently a possibility that you could have multiple winners. I mean, maybe that could happen. I don't know. All right, terrain guidelines. They do, again, this is just them. I actually like this, that OPR just goes ahead and provides some guidance on terrain, because terrain in a tournament is actually a pretty big deal. A lot of tournaments I've went to, they really can skimp on terrain, and that actually will affect the game a lot. Tournament games are notorious for having bad terrain. So I do like that they give some specifications on their terrain, and then they do specify that tables should have enough terrain to cover 25%. Large cap should have 6 inches in between for other pieces, nothing crazy. 50% should block line of sight. 33% should provide cover. Really good things. 33% difficult terrain. At least 2 pieces. So these are actually some pretty good recommendations that I think is going to sort of level set things in a tournament, right? You don't want to have a tournament that's just basically a bare open field. That's not going to be fun, nor is it going to be balancing. All right, line of sight guidelines. They do provide some. This is actually coming from the beginner's guide, but they reinstate it, which is things like you can see in all directions. You have line of sight to themselves. You can't see through solid obstacles, as well as the perimeter of all units. So this is actually in the beginner's guide. When you draw a line of sight, you aren't drawing line of sight through individual models. Actually, an opposing unit actually has a perimeter, right? So you don't need to look in between individual models in a unit. That unit itself forms a perimeter. which I actually like. I think that's a simplification that I think really works. No nitpick. It saves a lot of nitpickiness. Models can always see units in their see the models in their own units. So this is all sort of beginner's guide stuff. They do give you a height system, which I think is pretty solid about small, medium, large, huge, and titanic. So basically that different height values as well as being on terrain in other words, you could theoretically see over, you could see a giant, even if that giant is behind, a squad of spearmen. And I like that, right? So it's just some reasonable stuff that they just codify. They're just codifying some really good rules, right? So while you do have line of sight, eye level, you also reference sort of a height system so that, a big giant can't be covered by, a little swarm of rats or whatever. All right, so overall, I like it so far. I think it's fine. The scoring system, I'm not a big fan of. I would have loved to see the scoring system be a little more graduated, but I think this is fine. This is fine. Nothing. That's. I'm not going to spend all my time just being nitpicky about everything. I think the scoring system is fine. Just like I said, 2,000 points is a little small for me, but it's fine, especially as from beginner tournaments. All right, so let's look at the scenarios. So this is OPR. In this particular tournament, I set up a 4-round tournament, a 1-day tournament basically, and let's just sort of look at this. They give you 4 scenarios. The first one here is, so one thing you're going to know, all these scenarios, there's no player place objectives. All the objectives are set up predetermined, and I think it's fine. That could theoretically save some time, and so I don't mind it, or I don't mind sort of presetting everything. It's going to save a little time. I would prefer player placed objectives, but I'm okay with this as well. That's fine. All right, so in this one, this is just a standard scenario where you're going to score. This is just all standard OPR objective play. Basically, at the end of the game, you're going to get a victory point for every objective marker you control, plus 1 victory point if you've seized more objectives than your opponent during the last round. So it is a little interesting tweak here that in this particular one, it's almost like there's a bit of a comeback mechanic here. It almost means that you may not want to try and grab a whole bunch of objectives early because that could open you up to on that turn 4 grabbing a whole lot more. So this is actually a little interesting tactical depth that I like, where it's like standard scenario, but you know what? It's a little bit of a tweak where, so for instance, like faster armies could just do a mad rush and grab objectives. So it also means that you have to be careful at what objectives you want to grab early. So yeah, I think this is an interesting, I like this scenario. I think it's fine. They do add a special rule, which is optional, which is Psychic Storm, which is basically just rolling 2 dice and then you get some good and bad things happen on psychic spells. A little bit of, this can be a little clunky, but I don't mind it. It's not too complex, so I don't mind it. Yeah, I think it's a little bit of work, but the truth is that if players don't have casters, it really doesn't matter. Yeah, I think scenario 1 is fine. Just the standard setup here. Excuse me. Yeah, I think scenario 1 is fine. All right, scenario 2 is Moonflight. So in this one, you're setting up 4 objective markers. And in this one, you're set up in the corner here. So you got your 4 objective markers, and then Zone A and Zone B is where the opponents are setting up. In this one, this is actually a progressive scoring scenario. Where it says at the end of each round, you get 1 victory point for every objective you control. You get 1 if they seize more objective markers than your opponent. So a bit of a comeback mechanic, if you think about it. So this is scenario 1 was a end of the game. Scenario 2 is a progressive scoring system. And then they provide interesting movement. So this is an optional rule about reduced gravity, where... And this is actually interesting, where it's basically like if you want to sort of move and sort of around terrain, you actually move less. But if you just want to go in a straight line and basically land in obstacles and take a difficult terrain, you'll go faster. So I think this reduced gravity is really an interesting little pre-planning tactical where if you can sort of pre-plan these moon bounces, you can move a lot of speed. So actually, I think this special rule sort of favors pre-planning. It favors sort of positioning a unit so that on the next turn you can sort of bolt forward in a straight line. So I actually like this. I think this is actually a pretty cool little special rule. I don't mind it. The setup is fine, where it's just progressive scoring here. This is going to favor faster armies, but there's that balance there that actually slower armies can actually go pretty fast yourselves. So I like the scenario's good. The scenario's good. It's a progressive scoring scenario, so keep that in mind. All right. See, excuse me. Scenario 3 is about precious cargo. So in this particular one, it is 5 objectives, and you set them up here. Now, I'm going to critique this. One of the things that I don't agree with having this long deployment in tournaments, a lot of times tables are actually set side by side. So this scenario wouldn't work in some tournaments. I think an alternative to this is actually to do deployments at the corner, right? Where you set up, you basically have like a 12 where you split it half and then you set up by corners. Because that's the one thing I would critique in this scenario is that just from a practicality perspective, a lot of times tournament play is tables sitting side by side, and you can't do this scenario in that particular case. So I would just suggest maybe tweaking the deployment in that case to be corner deployment. I think that would fix it. All right, 5 objectives. In this particular case, though, when you grab an objective, you actually carry objectives. So in this scenario, objectives are carried by units. If ever they're shaken or destroyed, they're dropped within 1 inch and the opponent places it. I think that's a good. This is a end of the game. So this is not progressive scoring. You get 1 victory point for every objective you control, plus 1 victory point for every table quarter that you have more non-shaken units on. This is definitely going to favor horde armies because this is going to... So this scenario is a little worrying to me because non-shaken units, this means that it's a big advantage to basically undead. Because they'll never shake, and it doesn't matter. It's the amount of units. So this, and I don't know if I care too much for this scenario because of there's a lot of big advantages to undead armies in this one because they'll never shake, and it's units. So all you need is 1 model left in that unit to sort of count towards that table quarter. So may want to tweak this. I wouldn't mind maybe you count individual models so that undead are sort of balanced. Because remember, they're going to lose models. But in this particular one, whether the unit is at full strength or has a single model left, you're still going to count towards that. So I do have some concerns about this scenario, about the non-shaken ones. Like I said, this is going to favor undead armies, and I feel a little too much. But I think overall, I don't mind it. End of the game, sure. They have some special rules where if you're within cover of an objective, which I guess if you're carrying it basically, or if you're around it, bulky cargo. I like this special rule where if you're carrying objective, you need to be a little slower. And the other thing they have here is that if you destroy it on a 4 buffs, it goes away. Yeah, okay. I think I probably like the second one the most, which is making units a little slower if they're carrying objectives. I think the third scenario is probably the weakest so far. The setup isn't going to be good for a lot of tournaments from a practical perspective. I don't know if I care for the advantage that undead armies are going to have in this scenario. Maybe that could be tweaked. All right. Scenario 4 is Under Fire. And this one, 4 objective markers. This is fine. Again, so this is fine because it allows players to set up on their side so that you can have tournament tables right next to each other. I think this is fine. What is this? Objective markers. Stay under. So this is just standard. That's fine. This is basically just a standard sticky objectives. All right, how do you win? You get At the end of each round, so this is progressive scoring, you score 1 for every objective you control, plus 1 victory point for each enemy unit they destroy that was in 3 inches of an objective marker. So that's actually a real fascinating one because it means you want to get your units close to score objectives, but those units also can die. So this scenario is going to favor tougher armies, armies that that basically are. So in other words, if you have an army that has a lot of squishy units that try to grab the objectives early, an opponent can sort of shoot all those off and sort of get a lot of victory points here. I don't mind it. I'd need to play this scenario. It does feel nice. I think the scoring feels fine. It's just that it's an interesting little dynamic going on here. So, but it is at each round. So this is progressive scoring. So this is yeah, I don't mind it. I don't mind it. Bombardment is just this. What is this? It's just a random roll where you're doing damage to units. All right, that's fine. Just blowing up things. It's fine. Yeah, I think this is probably the least impactful of the special rules. Yeah, I think scenario 4 is fine. I think it's worth playing. Yeah, so the scenarios are good. I think the only scenario I think I would have concerns about is scenario 3. The setup is not going to work for some tournaments where it's side by side, and the secondary scoring of non-shaken units is going to give Undead a little bit more of an advantage than I feel they should have. But overall, I like it. I like this tournament pack. I think that overall it's done a great job. I could nitpick here and there, but I also think that tournament organizers can take this tournament pack, tweak a few things, and sort of make it their own. So definitely a big thank you to the OPR team for this tournament pack. I think it's a great start, and we can sort of iterate from there. All right, thanks everyone. Let me know what you think.